Welcome to the podcast where we celebrate innovation for a happy planet. I am your host, Abigail Carroll. If you've ever drawn inspiration from nature, this is the podcast for you. We're going to talk about biomimicry, a method of innovation that finds its solutions in nature. Our guest this week is Sidney Rostan, a Paris-based entrepreneur and biomimicry expert who has built his company BIOXEGY by exclusively offering innovative industrial engineering solutions that are designed to mimic nature. He says solutions modeled after nature have many advantages. But let's hear it from Sidney. Welcome to the podcast, Sidney.
Yes, thanks, Abigail, for having me.
Well, I am delighted to have you here. Your interest in biomimicry is very dear to my heart. It's a subject that I just find fascinating. So let's start at the beginning. What is biomimicry?
Well, biomimicry is a research and development approach. It's kind of a methodology that consists in drawing inspiration from nature's most ingenious designs. So when we talk about nature's ingenious designs, you can have intelligent materials, composite materials, you can have chemical processes. We are talking about functions. We are also talking sometimes about behavioral aspects. So it is all of biomimicry consists of drawing inspiration from all of this, I would say, biological know-how that has been around for millions of years in most cases. And so the idea behind biomimicry is, of course, to use as much as possible this kind of intelligence and the fact that it is optimized, and then also use the fact that nature most of the time is very sustainable. I would say even all of the time. Sustainable, circular, low footprint in terms of energy, materials, etc. So biomimicry is all of that. At first, it was kind of a philosophy, I would say. When you look at inventors, even I would say hundreds of years ago, getting inspiration from nature was kind of something that was, I would say, kind of a habit when it comes to geometry, forms, sometimes also behavioral aspects that were easy to copy and to mimic. Think, of course, of first airplane designers. It was kind of obvious to go see inspiration in birds and fireflies, insects, etc. That there is kind of the link is easy to make. But over time, over the last decades, I would say for the last 50 years, it has progressively become something very specific. We're talking about high-end R&D most of the time. So it's sophisticated, is also indirect links. So it's not just about forms and geometries. It's about, as I said, chemicals, materials, composite materials, something that is sometimes at the nano scale or micro scale. So biomimicry has evolved from something that was a philosophy and a mindset at the beginning to an R&D discipline and expertise that is very specific now.
Wow, very interesting. So you use that in your company, BIOXEGY.
Yes, BIOXEGY is one of the European experts in biomimicry. Actually, biomimicry is so much niche that we could also say that we are one of the international experts. And our role is to develop bio-inspired technologies, may it be for clients or for ourselves. So we actually, I would say our core job is to work together with industrial companies in the automotive domain, chemical domain. It can be in the construction industry. It can be in the luxury or consumer goods industry. So industrial players that do have challenges. Most of the time we interact with R&D departments or innovation departments. They submit these challenges, and our job, it may seem odd, but that's what biomimicry is all about, is looking into nature to see how nature solves this specific challenge, and then being able to do kind of a biomimetic retroengineering that consists in going from the biological model that we have investigated and identified to a bio-inspired technology. So that's our job. Of course, most of the time it's B2B, so business to business. And sometimes it's also our own team that creates a technology and that then patent a technology. It really depends. But our core job is B2B.
So it's so interesting to me that the direction of the information, you start with this problem and then you have the whole universe to look into.
Yes.
How do you
narrow that search down?
Yeah, it's a struggle. Yeah, at first we had to investigate a lot. That means hours and hours, I would say even months and months of work, investigative work, going through huge amounts of biological models that can put us biological papers. So, scientists everywhere over the world, in Guatemala, in Costa Rica, in Egypt, in Italy, all over the world. So biologists that describe nature. And of course, they publish biological papers, so scientific papers that describe biological system, animals, plants, etc., etc. And our job is basically to be able to identify that. We still do that today, so there is a lot of work behind that. But over the years, it has become simpler for our teams. Why? Because we have gathered expertise, we have gathered experience, which means that when we come across a challenge that is submitted by our partner, let's say, for example, a client that says, okay, I want to be able to dissipate heat in a more efficient way for my battery pack that has the tendency to overheat. So how can I dissipate heat in a more efficient way? Over time, we've came across the challenge so much and so frequently that we have gathered enough experience not to avoid looking into each biological paper and doing months of work. Nowadays, it's simpler for BIOXEGY. We know where and how nature dissipates heat. So we do have kind of a database that is easier for us to go looking in to make this kind of investigative work. Of course, this does not mean that we do not have investigative work anymore. We still contact biologists. We still go through loads of scientific literature in order to find the good biological models and good animals, good plants, etc., the right species that has the right system and the right property in order to be able to address the challenge. But I would say it's easier nowadays. 8 years on, we've gathered experience, so we have efficient databases.
So when you find a solution in nature that looks like it might work, there's some translation along the way. How do you look at something that's happening either in an animal or in a plant and kind of translate that into, sort of engineering, mechanical engineering?
Exactly. That's what we call retro engineering. So biomimetic retro engineering. Being able, so it's not easy. And most of the time, that's, I would say, one of the historical limits of biomimicry is that there was kind of an observation in nature. One would thought, wow, that's crazy, interesting, sophisticated. It's really interesting. Yes, but the problem is it needs to the output needs to be technology that is feasible, that is cost effective, that can be applied to industrial platform or industrial production process. It needs to answer market needs and sometimes also, of course, regulative needs and regulations. We need to respect them as well. So this means that I would say the biggest part of being a biomimetician, that's how we call a bio-inspired engineer, at BIOXEGY, is being able not only to identify the biological model, but being able to reproduce and copy in a feasible way. So, of course, it's all a question of material that are used, of the implication in terms of feasibility. So feasibility investigative work in order to understand, well, okay, some molecules, proteins, some texturations, some structural architectures, optical layers, coatings that you do observe in nature are built in a certain way by the growth of the plant, the growth of an animal, or by, organical maintenance, so molecules that interact together, then that can be repaired, for example, over time, etc. So this happens in nature, but once we observe that in nature, we're not typically and systematically able to reproduce that with the same materials for industrial purposes. That does not happen this way. So, for example, if you see texturation, let me give you one example. If you see texturation in nature, for example, that avoid reflection on a surface. So it can be interesting for several purposes in the industry. It can be for the optical industry. It can be interesting also for the consumer goods industry. So how do you avoid reflections? Well, what happens in nature is texturation, and texturation is, as I said, the growth of the animal or itself. So it happens over time, over months or over days. But transpose it to something that needs to be produced 100-fold or 1,000-fold per minute or per day for the consumer goods industry, and you'll find that this texturation, it can't be grown. It needs to be produced, for example, with laser texturation or specific molding that have cost implications that are compatible with the industry or the sector we are working with. So part of our job is to understand this transposition, being able to do this retro engineering. And again, it's also a question of experience. Over time, we've came to understand how we can transpose specific systems to industrial use cases. This question is complex because there are as many answers possible as there are sectors and use cases possible. I would say that the good news is that our success rate is around 70%. And being able to transform a biological model 70% of the time into something that is viable, industrially speaking, is a good first step. And I would say is successful enough and reassuring enough for clients to test biomimicry and to say, okay, this is credible and I want to work with BIOXEGY. But sometimes, I won't lie about it, sometimes it's harsh. So it is also being able to correctly anticipate the topic that you're addressing. So actually, this is kind of a huge learning for BIOXEGY and for every engineer that works at BIOXEGY, is that before, launching ourselves into a bio-inspired project where we say, okay, biomimicry it's versatile, it can address every type of situation, etc. Yes, on a theoretical point of view, it could. But nowadays, we put a lot of effort before launching a project to discuss the topics at hand with our partners. And so what happens most of the time is that we actually ask them for a list of topics. So topics where they think they have problems, challenges. So it can be pain points, can be incremental topics. It can also be disruptive topics. But we ask them for a list. And out of this list, we select the topics where we think we have the best chances of success. Not only because biomimicry can actually bring an added value compared to conventional engineering, but also because biomimicry has good chances of the technology can be feasible at the end. So it's the experience that is talking there. And I think that is something that is really appreciated by our prospects and by our clients.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on that? What are the advantages? Like, if a client has a problem to fix and that's on a, part of that list that you really feel like you've got some insight on and it can relate to this nature's functioning, how might your solution differ from a classical engineering solution? And how is the client appreciative of that?
For a blue economy to thrive, people need to use more sustainable products. But which products? And will consumers actually adopt them? Innovators like you are hustling to figure this out. Spark number 9 can tell you if there's demand for your product. Spark markets your product before it's built using online advertising so you launch smarter. Have a big idea? Vet it with Spark before you build. Visit Spark online at www.sparkno9.com or find them on LinkedIn.
I would say that, first of all, when it comes to solving pain points, imagine, for example, in Europe, I'm not sure if it's the case in the US, but I would imagine it will at some point also be a big topic, is how do you prevent, for example, eternal pollutants? PFAS, it's called PFAS in France. I think it's the international word for that.
Same in the States.
Yeah, same in the States. So PFAS, how do you avoid that? So most industrial, it's used in a lot of different sectors. We'll have explored many ways to solve a specific function thanks to PFAS. But once you come across a pain point where you have tested many coatings, many surface texturation, many types of materials, chemicals, polymers, etc., you are in such difficulty that it is actually interesting to find an alternative and say, okay, this specific function that I have solved over decades ago with PFAS, I want to understand how nature solved this specific challenge. And that's where biomimicry comes in handy, is, okay, finding a similar function, but seeing how this similar function is actually done or actually addressed in nature. That's the first added value, I would say. When it comes to incremental innovation, let's say we have a partner that wants to reduce the vibration in a electric car. So electric cars are create new problems of vibration, so noise, vibration, and acoustic challenges. So how can I reduce the parasitic noise that are created by electric vehicles or electric motors and platforms? Doing incremental innovation in terms of biomimicry means that you want to understand how has nature optimized a specific function, for example, reducing noise with composite materials, specific foam structures, specific interfaces, etc. So you benefit from the optimized way biomimicry has been nature has been evolving over years and years and years. So the added value, the whole purpose of doing biomimicry is getting the chance to look at something that has been around for millions of years or for at least thousands and thousands of years. So basically what you benefit from is kind of the biological selection process. We're talking about, trial and error for years and years and years.
It's not the beta.
Not the beta version. So this means that you actually can achieve performance, you can achieve sustainability, depending on the topic that you have. Sometimes it's lightweight design, sometimes it's noise absorption, sometimes it can be, as I said, reducing reflectance. When we talk about optical system, I talked also about dissipating heat, exchanging heat, isolation. You have many, many different use cases. So looking into nature means looking into optimized and enhanced system. And last, if you look at disruptive innovation, it can, so when you basically try to completely overramp or overhaul, I don't remember the English word for that, so completely rethink of a technology, a specific technology is done. So when you want to do something very disruptive, very new, doing biomimicry can also mean being very ideative. It creates new ideas, creates new concepts. It can be interesting. Let me give you one example. If you want, for example, to reshape and rethink of the way you design, for example, a landing gear for an aircraft. So landing gears are always the same system, dampeners, braking system, of course, the wheels, etc. You could do two things with biomimicry. First thing, it's doing incremental innovation, as I said. So for example, how do I reduce the weight by 10% or by 15%? And you look into natural structures that are very interesting when it comes to finding the right ratio between weight and resistance to compression forces, torsion forces, etc. So you could do incremental innovation with nature. And you look into bone design, you look into specific composites in tree structures, etc. So you'll find a lot of interesting models when it comes to lightweight design. So that's for the incremental part. But when it comes for the disruptive part, you could also perfectly ask the question, if it is your intention, well, I don't just want to reduce the weight of the landing gear by 10%. My interest is, what does the landing gear look like in 10 years or 15 years time? I want to completely revamp my system. I want to have something that is completely new and breakthrough. And then biomimicry useful because you can ask the question which is ideative, at least at first, which is, how does nature land? How does nature jump? How does nature stabilize itself, for example, in rugged terrain? You understand? And so you can do creative things with nature. So does this answer your question, Abigail?
Yeah, it's wonderful. So, do you have a favorite inspiration in nature? Is there something in nature that's just kind of blown your mind, like a favorite, I don't know, plant or animal that does something just really
Yeah.
outrageous that you could to share with us?
I mean, I could give an example of a project we had because it's one of my favorite ones, and I think
Okay.
it's a beautiful project.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, it was actually 2.5 years ago, there was one of our clients in the construction industry. So we're not talking about aerospace, we're not talking about automotive, etc., which are the fields where biomimicry is used. We're talking about construction industry. They came and they asked us, okay, we want to find an alternative to quicklime. Quicklime is a chemical that helps agglomerate soil particles for construction industry. So our client was using quicklime in order to stabilize the soil and the terrain where then they build then the construction. You have to stabilize the field, the soil. You have to have it very compact, mechanically stable, and also chemically stable. You don't want your field or your terrain to erode if there are, for example, heavy rains.
Yeah.
And in order to do so, they use quicklime. And so quicklime is perfect. On the paper, it creates mechanical stability, it creates chemical stability, is fast reaction, it's a great chemical, and the costs are reasonable. But the problem with quicklime is that quicklime is actually very carbon intensive. 1 ton of quicklime means 1 ton of CO2 that is used. And so if, for example, our client was using, maybe remember, for 50 or 60,000 tons of quicklime each year, it means a huge carbon
Yeah.
footprint.
Yeah.
And in Europe, it's a problem. It's a real problem. But not only is it a problem in terms of carbon footprint, it was becoming a problem in terms of economical balance. Problem that it is that quicklime, because of energy instability, energy cost instability in Europe, was beginning to be very, very, very expensive. So they asked us to find an alternative. We went to look into nature in insects that are very good in building. So I would say architectural geniuses. And we ended up looking into termites. We perfectly know that termites are good architects because they create interesting structures that are already used in architecture for ventilation purposes, etc., etc. But actually, what got our interest is that termites create mounds, so they create their homes thanks to local soil, argile, that they're using, but also biopolymers that exist, so fibers of plants, leaves, etc., that are found locally. So they agglomerate all of this in order to create the huge mounds, 6 meters high, maybe 15, 20 meters also underground. So this whole thing is mechanically stable, but it's also chemically stable. You can have heavy rains on the termite mounds, and it won't crumble. So it's very, very compact and very rigid and very mechanically stable. So we looked in this cipher to, well, how does the termite do that? What's the chemical secret behind that? And we actually found out that termites were using their saliva to do so. And more specifically, within their saliva, there were parts of chemical compounds, enzymatic compounds, that are used in order to do this kind of chemical reaction, and it happens fast. So their their chemical that agglomerates the soil is within their saliva. By understanding, deciphering all of that, we were able to understand that we could actually reproduce that in a synthetic way. So actually, the goal is not to have farms of termites where we actually farm their saliva. It's not the objective. Our objective was to create something that was industrially feasible. And there you go again. How do I make this happen on a large
Translation.
scale? And so we synthesized what we found, the compounds that we found in the termite in the saliva termites, in the termites' saliva, we were able to do that and synthesize that on an industrial scale. We brought the cost down. We completely reduced we hugely reduced the CO2 footprint. I think it was by 70%. We were then
Wow.
able also to use that on the industrial scale, so test it actually not only in the labs as a proof of concept, but then as well on the field. So this means that this technology, this bio-inspired chemical that replaces quicklime, it's an agglomerating chemical, is actually used in France on the fields. We have pilot testing fields, and it actually behaves the way we wanted it to be. So it is a great project, and that's one of my most favorite ones, because not only does it prove that, well, of course, biomimicry is useful, but it proves as well that biomimicry is useful in terms of chemicals and for the construction industry, which is a cost-conscious industry
Yeah.
because it has low margins. And of course, the termites are, very interesting insects. And it also shows that biomimicry is not only useful in terms of economics, performance, so bringing the cost down, but also in terms of CO2 footprint. And let me tell you that our clients will win bidding contests for construction sites because they have something that is less expensive and that is less CO2 emitting. So they will have a huge competitive advantage within their industry. So I think that's one of my favorite one, and the termite also is a nice favorite of mine. I do also like butterflies and dragonflies because I think that they are very efficient predators. They have a lot of equipment. If you look at the dragonfly has a very sophisticated vision system. They can look all around.
Yeah.
They have fast vision system, so they can see in slow motion. They have an efficient vision system, so they can track their prey without using too much energy for their vision system and for the computing system, which is actually their brain. So they're very efficient in terms of image processing, which could be interesting for algorithms, for example, autonomous algorithms. They also obviously have very efficient flying systems. So we are talking about very advanced aerodynamics. They can fly backwards. They can fly they can stay on the same place. They can fly fast forward. They can also have a lot of acceleration, deceleration. And of course, after that, it's also interesting to note that they have lightweight design on their wings. Their wings are both lightweight, very resistant, but also transparent. And their wings are sophisticated enough to be able also to prevent biofouling, which is the growth of bacteria on their wings, because they live in very humid environments. So dragonflies are very, very well-known predators. Their success rate is 98%. So I think it's a fascinating insect. And we've had at least half a dozen projects where we had use cases and technologies inspired by parts of the dragonfly. So it's one of my favorites.
I love it. Your passion is just so clear. How did you get going in this? Where did you discover that this would be your calling?
Yes, so I'm a business school graduate. So I'm not an engineer, and I'm not a biologist, whereas most of my team is.
Yep.
But it's not my case.
Oh, good thing.
And so I hadn't heard of biomimicry before. And I started my career in the automotive industry in Germany because I'm half German. So I started working at Audi and at Porsche AG. And Germans used to work on biomimicry. They call it bionics, mostly for mechatronic purposes, but also for lightweight design. And I heard of it. I heard of biomimicry and was kind of, oh, this is interesting. And I was at a stage where I thought I wanted to explore new ways of innovation. I wasn't sure if I wanted to become an entrepreneur, but I wanted to be free and in very, very dynamic environments. And of course, I wanted my job to have a purpose. So I wanted something that could create new technologies, but technologies that were sustainable, that were circular, or at least that could make a difference somehow. And so when I came across, so it was practically 10 years ago, when I came across biomimicry, I immediately became passionate for the reasons that you can feel is that it's so magical, and it's kind of an obvious idea to say, well, nature has had 3.8 billion years of evolution, so it's an enhanced R&D laboratory, and the idea is elegant. It's subtle. I like the idea, and of course, jungling between biology and engineering was also very attractive. So I became passionate around that. But fact is that after a couple of weeks of me, reading books around biomimicry, looking at TEDx conferences, and every stuff that you could find online, the fact was that, okay, biomimicry is interesting, but how come I don't hear so much success stories? You can find some success stories, but it's always the same. And I thought, well, this is kind of odd. How come that biomimicry is not used on a more democratized way and on a more massive way? We hear about artificial intelligence, we hear about quantum computing, so we hear about new frontiers of innovation all of the day, but not that much biomimicry, and all the more so 10 years ago. And so I quickly understood that biomimicry has been around for some decades in uphill science. So, for example, in the US, we're talking about Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and so a company in the aerospace industry working with uphill science. So Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Caltech, Virginia Tech, etc. So uphill science, aerospace industry, and projects that takes years to evolve. So, of course, you would find patents, and actually the dynamics about bio-inspired technology being patented is growing. So there is kind of a fast-moving dynamics here. But what I observed is that, may it be in the United States or in Europe or in Asia, it is difficult to find a lot of success stories, and the transmission between uphill science and downhill corporate research and development and then products is difficult to make for biomimicry. And so I thought to myself, well, it could be interesting to create a company that would be an expert in that. I must say that, of course, it was kind of a moonshot, but I was in my early 20s. I had nothing to lose. And so I thought, well, maybe it's the time for me to build a dream company. And so at first I was like alone on that. And again, I'm not an engineer. So my objective was to create kind of a consulting firm for at least a year. And then after a year, being able to transform it into an engineering company. And so that's exactly how it went down in 2018, sorry. So it will be 8 years ago in a couple of months. I created BIOXEGY, and I went to look for first clients, telling them, okay, guys, hello, this is biomimicry. This is how biomimicry could be useful. Let's do some workshops. And so the first ones were like, okay, this guy is crazy, but he's passionate. He is selling the idea well. Why not test a workshop for maybe €1,000 or €2,000, And so also I think day 2 had nothing to lose in testing that. And I think it went well. The first workshops were my first client was in the automotive domain, and the first workshop were conclusive enough so that they asked me to pursue the projects and tell me, okay, the idea of biomimicry is interesting. We understand how biomimicry could be useful for our use cases, and I was expert enough to have investigative work on my own, even if I was not an engineer. And then they asked me after the workshop, so what now? And this what now was the kind of the signal to say, okay, this is great. The idea that I had to create a consulting company that then evolves to an engineering company actually works, because then the need is there. They say, okay, what now? Now we want to develop the concept. Then we want to have a proof of concept, and then we want to develop the technology and go through all the technology maturity levels. And so at this stage, I told them, okay, if you want it to happen, you have to pay me part of the project when we start the project and when we sign the project. And with this money, I was able to recruit the first engineers, and then over time gather and hire a team of engineers that have experience enough. And so
Amazing.
that's the entrepreneurial story that has been mine for the last 8 years.
Listeners may remember Patrick Breeding, who was on our show last year to talk about Marin Skincare and its clinically proven formula that uses glycoproteins from Maine lobsters to treat eczema and dry, damaged skin. This company has since become wildly successful with this lobster lotion, and Patrick is inviting listeners to a 20% discount on their products by using the coupon code HAPPYPLANET on their website, marinskincare.com. I use this product myself, and I highly recommend it.
So how many folks do you have in your firm today?
We are 30 people strong. So
Wow.
I would say it's not a startup anymore. It's kind of more of a scale-up company or mid-sized company. And and recruiting new ones. Yeah, and over time we've worked with French companies. So I went back to France to create my company because I thought that the startup atmosphere, the startup mindset in France was interesting and was favorable. I think it was the good conditions. You have a lot of subsidiaries, you have a lot of help from the state, etc. So it was kind of a good ecosystem to create a company, to create a startup. And I created the company. We had our first French clients. Now we have clients in Germany, in Switzerland, in Belgium, in Austria. We even have clients in Japan. We have our first clients also in the United States. We have them in Italy. So the company is growing international, and I think that's a good sign. I'm very proud of that.
So did you ever have to raise money? I mean, it's doing well, it's growing. Because you're in a consulting firm, it was just sort of slow growth, and you own your own company. That's amazing.
Exactly. The consulting business means I could do kind of a bootstrap or organic growth logic. So I don't have investors. But in the future, we'll have other business models. So as I said, we are also creating our new technologies, which mean that one day or the other we'll have to have investors on board, but maybe on a branch of BIOXEGY, not the job and the general business model that we've had over the years.
Yeah. And is that how you see the balance going? Is it more interesting to build products? Is that the idea, or do you really want to stay in the world of consulting?
No, I mean, we'll keep our consulting business. We'll keep our engineering office consulting business, because it's the core, I would say, backbone of our company, which helps us understand the tendencies that each sector faces. It's noon in France, so I had lunch with a client of ours in the perfume industry. And it's interesting for us to gather the types of topics, challenges, pain points that have. So we'll definitely keep the engineering and consulting business.
That's how you're learning.
Yeah, that's how we learn. But it is for us interesting to create and develop, even if it's more cash intensive, our own technologies over time, because we don't. I mean, at least we are a little bit more autonomous, which means that we don't have to justify to a client his own boss and the boss of the boss that needs to validate a budget, the soundproof technology that we want to create. We think that it's all the questions of being able to try, to dare, and not to be too hesitating about an innovation or a technology. And so most of the time in the consulting business, your own ability to innovate and to create new technology really depends on the willingness and risk-taking strategy of your own client. And so in order to be more free, in order to have the ability to be audacious, to be, to have great ideas and to be a little bit more risky in our approach, we just need to create our own technologies. So BIOXEGY can and already does invest a little bit of money in some of these technologies that we then will resell in terms of, we will resell patents or licensing rights to patents, or even create some of our own products. So we already have projects ongoing on that. But if for some of these technologies, they're so much ambitious that we will need to raise funds for that, to raise money for that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to know. So, do you have advice for other entrepreneurs that are environmentally thoughtful, looking at nature kind of businesses?
Yes, I think that what creates a successful business is being able to keep things pragmatic. In the nature business, in the environmental business, most of the entrepreneurs, especially young ones that I see or meet, have huge ideas. They are really ideologically driven, which is perfectly understandable and which is fine, because you need ideology and you need passion and you need dreams in order to be an entrepreneur and to be able to change things, because you will have front wind and not
tailwinds.
You won't have always tailwind. You will have wind that come in your face and that creates obstacles. So it is good to have ideology, but keep in mind, and that would be my advice, always keep in mind to be cool-headed enough and pragmatic enough to understand that what makes a successful business is, at the end, is there a return on investment for your client? And the return on investment could be monetary, of course. It could be marketing. It could be regulations. You can have different types of return on investment.
Yeah.
But if the return on investment is not there, you won't convince anybody. So I would say my advice, and I've lived through that, is staying pragmatic, even if you're trying to sell sustainable technologies, sustainable concepts. It will function only if there is a solid business model, a solid product, and a solid, money strategy behind that for you and for your clients and for your partners and for your investors.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I ask everybody this one parting question. Are you optimistic? I mean, we talked to all these entrepreneurs that are doing things that have positive impacts on the planet. Are you feeling optimistic about the planet and where we're headed with today?
I am optimistic in the sense that over time, things will get in order and will be in urgent situation enough to find solution and to implement these solutions. I'm optimistic enough for that. So I'm optimistic in a way that I don't think that humanity will destroy itself, and that one day or the other, we will be in dire situation enough to create technologies and to be able to react. And most of the time, that's how the human species has worked. We are bad at anticipating, actually, I think. We are more, fitted to react, which is kind of a biological way of things. It's you only react to something that is palpable, near, understandable, that can be felt. It's difficult to anticipate. On that part, I'm enthusiastic and optimistic enough to think that we will find solution at the end, and we will overcome all the challenges that are around sustainable, around climates, around pollution, etc., etc. Where I'm a bit more pessimistic is that I don't think it will happen without huge losses. And I think that we will see dire times, difficult times, where there will be losses of life, continuous losses of biodiversity, wars and conflicts, and also, maybe famine. And I think there will be difficult situations. And I think it's not being pessimistic. I think it's more being realistic. If you look at the studies, if you look at the trajectories, if you look at any types of, expert papers, they all describe the same hard times to come. So it's not being pessimistic to think that this will happen. It's just being realistic. Being optimistic is saying, okay, even this, if this happens, even all the hardships will create solutions. That's the way I see the future.